Tie or La Cravate is a French documentary directed by Etienne and Mathias Théry, and it is a documentary that followed a young National Front activist during the 2017 presidential election. Now, the National Front, or the Front National, is a far-right nationalist French party that was rebranded in 2017, actually, after the election as the Rassemblement National. And I mention this because the rebranding of the party has been going on for quite a long time now, and it feeds into the storyline, into the plot of the film, if you will. So, very quickly, the Front National is a far-right nationalist party that was founded in the 70s by a man called Jean-Marie Le Pen, although there are 12 founding members, and has at the center of it Jean-Marie Le Pen's daughter called Marine Le Pen, who is a very prominent political figure in the French landscape. In the last election, for example, she came in second, getting into the second tour of the presidential election. Now, the party's been gradually becoming more and more popular over the last 10, 15 years. It's also kind of been very careful about not committing the same mistakes it did in the past and kind of hiding away its past members and its past sort of dubious activities. In the 90s, for example, even up to the early 2000s, it was very common to see at National Front rallies skinheads, people with swastikas, people doing Nazi salutes, people shouting very explicit anti-Semitic, outright racist comments, and now they've kind of polished the edges and are, your typical kind of far-right nationalist party, but they don't say the same extreme things as they used to, and they don't have or platform the same sort of extreme people as they did even up till the early 2000s. But if you really know the history of the party, you'll know that, for example, its 12 founding members, about a quarter of them were not only Nazi collaborators, but they actually were people that volunteered to fight with the Nazis on the Eastern Front and go and kill some Russians. So if history matters, and apparently history does matter to these people, then that's the kind of people you're dealing with. Nazi collaborators, Nazi sympathizers, outright Nazi soldiers, former OAS members, which was in the 60s a paramilitary group that attempted a coup and tried to assassinate the then French president General de Gaulle, as well as people that are Holocaust deniers. And so, like I said, this actually feeds into the documentary because we will learn around the halfway point that our subject is not just a Front National activist, but is somebody who, in his youth, basically attempted an attack on his school. He never actually went through with it, but he ran away with a gun, I believe, when he was 13, and with the intent of doing a school shooting, and then sort of was placed in foster care, where he sort of met a bunch of skinheads and for a while was a skinhead. So he's typically the kind of person that the Front National is trying to distance itself from, and not many people in the party that he's working with actually know this. That also means that he's never going to be able to have more of a political career, of a political implication, than just being a regular activist. I found the movie to be quite fascinating for several reasons. One is it kind of confirms this thing that we all really kind of know, but it's how attractive the far right is to disenfranchised, maladjusted young white men who find in these groups a sort of community that they really lack and an identity that they can attach themselves to, no matter how sort of ill-advised and kind of, in a way, fake it is, because they refer to history quite a lot, but it's, a manufactured, idealized history that they kind of create, but for them, it's their heritage, and they find a lot of sort of power in this newfound group and this newfound identity. The movie is also fascinating just from the simple standpoint of following the political process, and especially the process of an election. And, what's kind of funny is just how much of just a regular, normal political party the Front National really is. I mean, it plays on, having never been in power and on being sort of the outsider's party, but it's nothing more than a corporate structure in which the higher-ups are all concerned with their own careers and their own ambitions, and the boots on the ground are there to do all the heavy lifting and not really get any reward. You know, the higher-ups in the party don't even seem that ideologically driven. It doesn't really seem like they believe in what they said. They just found a niche or a marketing strategy to appeal to people and to launch their careers. And that makes them both a lot less frightening, but at the same time, possibly even more dangerous, because in a way, it makes them more legitimate. But finally, I think the movie is most fascinating because of its aesthetic approach. From the outset, it seems extraordinarily classical. It's divided, let's say, into two parts. One being the documentary actually following the process of this activist as he is campaigning through this election in a more direct, classic cinema verite style, and it is intercut with sit-down interviews. But it's only when you look at how the film is edited through sound that the whole proposition makes sense. It is a film with almost no diegetic sound, where all of the sound comes from a voiceover that is narrated by one of the filmmakers and that was also written by one of the filmmakers. It is a voiceover that's written in the style of a fable. It's very literary, very well written, and it is constructed, it's crafted from the interviews that these guys have had with this subject beforehand. The choice to do that is very clearly in order to not voice the opinions of people whose ideology they find repulsive, and to not have the narrative hijacked by those people. If you've ever seen Barbara Schroeder's documentary on General Idi Amin Dada, that's something that I highly recommend you do because it's a fascinating documentary, but it's a perfect example for me of a documentary that's completely hijacked by its subject. Clearly, Barbara Schroeder is out there to make a documentary on a character that is terrifying and violent and who he absolutely abhors. But Amin Dada is so incredibly charismatic and charming that the documentary could almost function like propaganda and could almost be his mouthpiece. And I think it proves that charisma and screen presence is almost more important than intent or writing or dialogue, and it sort of explains why some people can get away with anything. And you could certainly make an argument that at a certain point it's kind of unethical because they're certainly taking away the voice of their subject and replacing it with their own. And the way they get around that is through the sit-down interview portion, where they're not actually interviewing him, but they are letting him go through the voiceover and read what they have written, and sort of offer a counterpoint, sort of be there to contest maybe what they've written or agree. So he is made fully aware of the words that these guys are choosing and how they are going to choose to represent him. And I really personally found that choice quite fascinating and the film to be extraordinarily engaging and one that I really, really recommend. So as always, thanks very much for watching the video. Please be sure to hit the like button if you like the review, subscribe if you're new, and until next time, see ya.
Always kiss both cheek. Go on holiday for 16 weeks. I make sound when I speak like au revoir.